28 Days Latte. Written by J.L. Fairclough. Read by the Robotronic 5000. The journey to head office had been long and arduous. A month round trip through the Badlands for a meeting which could have easily been an email, if email still existed. Still, it was always good to see his fellow Irregular Joe's managers, even if it did mean leaving the cafe in the hands of his bungling part-timer, Hollister. Home was just over the hill, and Gunter was certainly looking forward to putting his feet up, even if it was only for a moment while he surveyed the damage his underling had done to their profits while he was gone. His grip on the cane he was leant on tightened, as his labored footsteps became more like dragging meat sacks across the sand. He was absolutely exhausted. He'd never been the athletic sort, and his pack mutant had annoyingly wandered off a few miles back, mercifully leaving him his supplies in its bid for freedom, though this was a mercy his aching back would have rather avoided. Why was the last mile or so always the worst? He stopped to take a gulp from his canteen, as the silhouette of his shop loomed in the distance. Something seemed off. Squinting and shielding his eyes from the green-tinted sun, he strained to inspect the scene in greater detail. An anxious pang manifested in his stomach. Where were the customers? Usually there were at least a few irregulars sat at the tables outside. Had that idiot overslept again? He quickened his pace, ignoring the raw ache in his limbs. The closer he got, the more anxious he felt. The sound of a broken jazz record echoed eerily across the unusually empty street, and drag marks scored into the distance from knocked-over coffee tables. A strange smell drifted on the wind, something sweet, which he couldn't quite put his finger on. Cautiously, he maneuvered up the cafe's steps, noticing they were slick with spilt coffee. Or were they? The texture didn't feel right, even through the worn-out husks he called shoes. It was sort of thicker, almost congealed. Syrup, perhaps? But then, what were the lumps? In a moment of sudden clarity, the color drained from his face. The steps were slick with regular customers. He flew up the rest of the stairs and slammed the door behind him.
Hollister!
He yelled.
What's going on?
Naturally, there was no reply. As he gathered the courage to regain his composure, Gunter gradually absorbed the alien nature of his usually familiar surroundings. Rather than the soothing pale green paint and generic art, the walls were now decorated with raw, splattered innards. The once comfortable sofas and armchairs were all torn to shreds and seemed melded together with the remnants of their former occupants. He pulled his neckerchief over his nose in a vain attempt to block out the abysmal odor, and, gingerly stepping over the larger chunks of person, he made his way to the back room. As he furtively opened the door, he grimaced. He'd found his barista, or at least half of him. Hollister's remains were slumped in the corner, with what was left of his arms clutching a large shotgun. A bloody trail from the chasm in what used to be his underling's abdomen led Gunter to the cause of his grisly demise. A fuzzy red pile of mutated creatures lay in a gnawed hole in the wall. It seemed, to his credit, Hollister had managed to dispatch a fair few of the critters before being overwhelmed. It was at this point Gunter's blood froze. Something began to dawn on him that was altogether more terrifying than the demise of his lackey and loyal customers, even the ruination of his store. The coffee was gone. All of it. Those mewling bastard beasts had dragged it off with them. He was getting fired for sure. Mopping the sweat from his brow, he wondered aloud.
Could this day really get any worse?
But his chain of thought was quickly interrupted. An arrow sailed swiftly past Gunter's nose and bit into the notice board beside him. His gaze followed the trajectory back through the broken window, and he let out a loud, labored sigh. On the horizon, a plethora of humanoid shapes began to form. Slowly emerging from the haze were several posses of mercs and raiders, fully armed and filthy.
That was rhetorical,
He muttered to himself as he clambered into the crawl space behind the counter.